Hey boss, what's up?
Nikos, I've got good and bad news for you. The good news is that after our previous automation steps at the company, where we installed typewriters, computers, gave everyone access to Microsoft Word, gave everyone autocorrect, we are now making the next step in automation. We are implementing ChatGPT at an organizational level. The bad news is you're fired because we don't need you anymore.
Fired? How can you just fire me like that? I mean, I've been doing quite good for you as
Like
a software developer.
Nikos, I like you, but you just make PowerPoints all days and write newsletter articles, and we got Chat GPT for that. We got to get along with the times.
But I mean, I can create basic like React components and stuff for the websites, and I mean, isn't that helpful to you guys? I mean,
Yeah, I know you can do it, but if I want React scripts with terrible errors in them, well, I can use an AI to generate those.
okay, that was great, mate. Well, everybody, welcome to the Nikos show. Our first acting session here, but we imagine that these scenarios will play around a lot, and we've got none other than Marijn here, who is an AI lead and data scientist and fantastic supporter of Ukraine. So, welcome to the show today, sir.
Hey there, thank you for having us. Us.
So, how did you get into the whole field of artificial intelligence?
That's a long story. I started out studying sociology like 10 years ago, and my dad always asked me, why the hell are you going to do that? I mean, just going to talk about the behavior of large groups of people using data and statistics? And I'm like, yeah, because I learned to model pandemics like Ebola back then. Did a lot of work on electoral outcomes, forecasting those, analyzing those. I actually did my master's thesis on crime in my hometown of Rotterdam over here, and the distribution thereof. And then Capgemini hired me, saying, "Wow, that's cool. That's data science and AI." And suddenly, I was a data scientist.
So, sociology is not a hard science; it's more of an art form. So, how do you go from that to statistics and
Yeah,
really hard maths?
that is the stigma. But apparently, I'm all about stigmas because I went to Utrecht University, the most quantitative of all universities within Europe on the social science domain.
Right.
Because if we look at modern social issues, everything from discrimination to again pandemics, to crime levels, to refugee flows, those are quite quantitative too. We have so much data being generated about it. And nowadays, I enter a team with like 3, 4 computer scientists, an econometrician, and somebody who studied AI. And then we go like, yeah, but we're modeling human behavior here. And then there's just this silence when we get an actual question that doesn't pertain to how hard do we run CUDA and optimize these GPUs, or how do we fix this coding problem. But okay, so there's a gender pay gap. How do we calculate that? Okay, so there's refugee flows. Where should we get our data from? I then happen to have read papers on that stuff and done it for years. So I go like, let's use hamburger prices. And people look at me with a weird face. They usually give me a weird face going like, why hamburger prices? And I'm like, well, the Big Mac index is one of the best indicators of economic development worldwide, because it gives you the price of a Big Mac in every country of the world for every year. And the delta over there, so the change in Big Mac prices, is often a better indicator of economic development in a developing country than the buzz their government publishes in official economic statements. Thus, suddenly we're using hamburger prices to forecast movement of refugees across borders. And that's because I studied sociology. Dad?
So for me, hamburger price increase would be uh, higher inflation. So unless the hamburger price was at a constant, that would show me like there would be a migration between low hamburger prices to higher hamburger prices. But if the rate of change was too fast, then that would be something to avoid for refugees, I'd
Like
imagine.
the very simple explanation here is if like you see the hamburger prices go up in a country, that means that's a bad sign for how they're doing economically. So the next year you will see an increased inflow from that country. So you have 2014, 15, then you'll see that representative in a flow in 16. And that's just one of hundreds of influences you can use to forecast caseloads, for example. But this is just a terrible example of how the angle, that's the thing in data science, you need to combine different fields, different specialities. I work with theoretical mathematicians, a physicist, a psychologist, and we all see different problems. So we argue the whole day, but because of that, we also see different and thus better solutions when we combine our efforts. And that's why I love the field, because I'm learning stuff every day.
So for me, I've been trying to get into machine learning and AI, and I'm a software developer, but I find that the gap between my knowledge of just doing front ends and websites versus designing, interpreting these papers on artificial intelligence research is so hard for me to do it, so that I'm not really competitive. So how did you manage to sort of pivot your professional towards hardcore data scientists?
I think it was Einstein who once wrote to keep everything as simple as possible, but no more simple than that. When we are encountering a big problem, I'm just going to use gender pay gaps here as an example, which some people say it's not a problem at all. And then I say, sure, give me the data, I'll check for you. You don't want the most complicated and the most performing model. You want to explain it. Thus, you go for always go for the simplest model possible. Now, I have more of a background in statistics than in hardcore machine learning, I'll admit. But often, when we're building a model and we go like, okay, simple linear regression versus random forest versus neural nets or XGBoost model, it's all a trade-off in terms of explainability and accuracy. And more often than not, we go for the simpler model because it's more explainable, because if you can't explain why we're forecasting where somebody gets a burnout or something, then they're not going to believe you and they're not going to act upon it. And suddenly, my whole study of using methods and statistics to model these things comes real in handy. So here's my message to all the social science students studying. There is hope for you.
So do you think that, how much of an impact do you think things like ChatGPT are going to have on general society?
Well, as we just saw when you got fired, we saw similar we saw a similar mechanism happen the moment the computer arrived in our fields, in the labor force as a whole. We had dozens of people saying, no, I don't need to learn how to use a digital thing because my job is too important for that. I don't need to learn to use a typewriter. That's a secretary's thing. I don't need to learn to use a phone, let alone a mobile phone. I don't need that. Those are usually the dinosaurs speaking, because if you look around, do you have a secretary who makes all the appointments for you and writes out all your notes? No,
Nope.
you do that yourself, because
Yeah.
we automated a lot of the frustrating work that comes along with it, and what remains is the actual really important work. Autocorrect, spell check is another important thing. We had riots within education saying, no, the kids won't know how to spell anymore if you give them autocorrect. So we should ban that.
Right.
In the same way they should, I don't know, ban a word processor at school. Heck no, they need to learn to use those faster than ever. Because here's the main thing. It helps us speed up our work by automating a part of it. That's why I started talking about automation. And this is just the next step. I have a professor friend in San Francisco right now who is panicking about, oh God, all my students are just going to use ChatGPT to write the papers. But after careful consideration, we realized it's not about writing. It's about rewriting. ChatGPT enables us to write stuff and generate text real easy, real fast. And ChatGPT is just one example, a particularly successful example of that technology. But it does not allow us to rewrite and write quality stuff because it has no notion of quality. It only has a notion of replication, the stuff, of replicating the stuff it's already seen before. So the problem isn't that AI can now write papers as good as a student. The problem is that some students write papers as badly as AI, and we give them a B or a C, just because they handed in the 4 or 5 pages they were asked to. And now we'll go like, you could have just let an AI generate those 5 papers, but they're not good.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true magic. Our automation of some human behavior allows us to more properly value what still remains human.
Mm-hmm. In terms of my field, there's a lot of stuff that I absolutely hate doing now. And like, so if I could be given some designs and then the AI generates the HTML markup, that's basically, the thing is, what I've seen so far with these ChatGPT generated web pages is that they're very quaint web pages that are generated, and they're not designed to be scalable. So, for example, the kind of work that I do in organizations is provide structure for multiple websites to be designed from the same components and design systems implemented for light, dark mode responsive. It takes a lot of careful thought, and it's so easy for code bases to turn in spaghetti mode and diverge and duplicate code. So initially there's no competition for that between terms of AI and what programmers can do. I mean, it's but we've been surprised. I don't know how. I mean, you basically have to, if for a ChatGPT to be able to pull off a proper website organization, it would have to, in a sense, look at that organization, look at its color schemes.
But there you go. That's not the goal. The goal is it is not a silver bullet that will automate a whole workflow or automate tons of people. In the same way, autocorrect did not cancel jobs; it changed jobs. If you're building a POC or a prototype or a first sketch web version, or I don't know, sketches of movies before you actually tape the whole damn thing using Midjourney, that is great. But it's a step in the process that we automate. We're not automating the process as a whole. And the naysayers who say, all the jobs are going to change, pretend that we're automating the whole job. But that was never the case, not historically nor now.
Yeah, I think Jordan Peterson got a lot of traction with his basically talking about ChatGPT. People can find that on YouTube, what he thought about that. And in terms of my everyday experience, I use GitHub Copilot, which is Microsoft's AI generated on billions of lines of code in a sense on GitHub. And probably 50% of the time, I'm using some of it to start off functions, and it gets it right. But a lot of times, some of the code that it'll generate will trip you up, and you'll come back and say, "Where did that come from? Where did that variable come from?" And you have to change it. So you're spending there's a little bit of a cost hit in terms of it generating just wrong code. But I'd say on the whole, it increases my productivity probably 40 to 30% in terms of lines of code that's generated.
But Nikos, here comes the really scary idea. What if at some point, because all the kids will now start learning to code using autocode tools, they won't be able to use Stack Overflow properly anymore. Then we will be the old farts complaining, why don't these kids learn to use Stack Overflow and cry for hours about a bug that's not auto-detected like I learned it? It's not right.
I don't think
the future we're heading for.
Well, will they be able to learn quicker with ChatGPT? It's hard to say because I can't relate to it, because we learn to code by basically making mistakes and compiler errors, and we don't know. I don't know. I don't have experience to be able to come up with some idea of how that would be, what it would be like to train under something like that. But mentorship would be great, and a lot of times people don't have time for mentors. So if this thing can mentor them, I mean, actually, what I do in code now is I will actually sit and write a comment. This function does this, and then it generates the code. But it doesn't actually just take a blank page and generate code. I have to actually tell it what I want.
Like, it generates templates, both when it comes to visuals, when it comes to text, when it comes to code. It generates a rough sketch of the thing you want, but you still have to adjust it, if it's a paper, and being able to adjust it and make it a proper thing rather than just an auto-generated thing. That's where the value will lie in the future. Yeah. I'm going to use a terrible example here. I'm going to use porn as an example, which we can also auto-generate using Midjourney and other types of image generation models. But there are distinct issues with it, such as an AI does not know how many fingers a human is supposed to have. So usually the number of fingers and the hands and such are completely off when you auto-generate that, meaning the niche has now become to keep the hands off screen or behind the back in all cases. And you can recognize auto-generated art by the fact that the hands are off screen, because they can't do that yet.
Strange.
Also, the models aren't all too great at generating multiple images, multiple people, multiple persons at the same time, which can be an issue when you're, I don't know, portraying interactions between persons, if you get what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you say red hair and they'll both have red hair.
People have too much time on their hands.
You say really big hands, they'll both have really big hands. There's an issue.
You probably get lots of nightmares on people working in that field.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Oh, I caught you off guard with that one. Like for movie makers, it's insane. We are now generating new images of movies that were stills of images of movies that were never made. Like, can I get Jurassic Park in the style of David Lynch? That kind of stuff. It's really cool. Can I get Dune made by Steven Spielberg? Okay, maybe not Steven Spielberg, but Dune Disney style. Let's go. Until Disney starts to sue everyone, at least.
Does it actually make moving movies, or does it make just pictures?
No, it's stills at this point in time.
Because like imagination is a total human quality. So are we at a point where it can generate a plot?
It totally can. But usually the plot is just an aggregation of all plots fed into the model. It won't actually do anything. It won't actually do anything out of the scope of the data fed to the model. And that is and has always been the primary limitation. No matter how cool we use neural nets and GPUs nowadays, the core limitation is the fact that neural nets cannot move outside of the parameters set by the data set.
Yeah, that's what I do hear from what I would call my programming mentor, who's 45. It's always good to have somebody smarter than you in the room, no matter where you get to in life. And
that's the co-pilot thing.
Yeah, and he basically says that all this ChatGPT and all that stuff and all these AIs, they're basically just taking existing data and formulating it into new projections. So there isn't anything truly creative coming on there, which is comforting, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine a really scary world where AI could generate plots like that would. You'd think the most creative thing that humans can do, in a sense, is create a novel. You know, that's.
But with all due respect, if I look at the average Netflix lineup, you ain't gonna tell me that the multi-million productions that dozens, if not hundreds of people spend time and effort on, that those are all very original.
Yeah, a lot of stuff on Netflix is... I can only watch one episode, and that's usually the most interesting episode, and I just fall asleep. I think there's one called Manifest, where like half the people on the plane, all the people on the plane survived some big EMP across the world, and the first two episodes were okay, and then after that it just drags on, you know.
Most of the new stuff is repeated stuff of old stuff anyway. I love the Pokemon generators that some use nowadays to generate new Pokemons, but usually just combinations of old Pokemons. And if you then put those besides the Pokemons actually used in new generations, then you'll see the difference. Because there's nothing new about those. They're just combinations of stuff you've already seen. And the most popular new ones are apparently stuff from outside of the box. But then again, I'm not saying I still play Pokemon. Can we cut that? No, we can't. Damn.
Yeah, the previous guy I was on just talking about streaming and retro games and stuff like that. One of the things that I saw, I'm trying to get into digital art. I find it quite therapeutic, but I saw some of these things where the AI would generate pictures, and you see all these digital artists on the YouTube comments basically sounding suicidal, and like I just can't imagine what it'd be like to be training 4 or 5 years, and then basically companies they want to commission some art, they'll spend $2 on some AI thing versus like hundreds of pounds. That's really sad.
I'm going to repeat an old professor of mine who said, Marijn, the mechanisms don't change, only the context in which they manifest. Because the current crisis we see with digital artists is the same crisis that normal artists had when digital came up. And everyone started using Photoshop and Illustrator and
Mhm.
InDesign and the whole Adobe suite. And they saw half their work field either go onto the computer or disappear. I'm not saying it's
Yeah,
exactly the same, of
that's the
course, but
two.
there's parallels.
But that's just your paintbrushes changing because it's still very labor intensive. The only good thing about digital versus paper is that you can have layers and undo, and which you get one shot sometimes with canvases, or before you start putting too many layers of paint on it. So, when AI starts generating stuff, it's completely paradigm shift from digital to traditional media, completely different.
I wouldn't say that's the only difference between normal art and digital art, but I ain't an artist, so.
I mean, the terms of like value of digital art, all this NFT stuff for me is just a big pyramid scheme.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it is.
But this traditional art seems to basically be like currency or like gold that maintains its value. So that market there, I think, is safe. And I think with the advent of digital, then there's going to be a premium on physical art forms and paintings and things like
Yeah,
that.
but
So
we got to turn this around because the advent of digital art also made the whole market boom because suddenly everyone who was displaying, publishing a magazine or had a website somewhere could actually implement that art there. You didn't need to have a physical store or something to display it. So while we say, yeah, it reduced some of the dimensions of old art, it also opened up completely new ones. And we're seeing the same happen now that we can auto-generate text, auto-generate images, auto-generate whole plots. So I'm looking forward to all the Hollywood script writers going like, yeah, the script is terrible. It could have been created by an AI. We're going to see that as slang. Is this AI generated? Because it's so bad
yeah,
or so generic.
I just I just I'm still negative on the general effects on society. I think that so many jobs will be taken that there'll be a greater tendency towards UBI and big government. And when you're on UBI, you're more likely to obey what the government says because you don't have another option. That's what scares me long term. Um,
What scares me is that the government is running behind legislation on all of this by at least a decade.
what should be like legislated?
Like, let me put it this way: GDPR, which is a big European thing, which is on the whole a good thing that has been implemented, was happening years and years after all the social media first started impeding on the civil rights and privacy of citizens all throughout Europe. And still, even after implementation, nothing's really happened because we don't have the decade of people getting sued and seeing the outcomes of all of that to deter new companies of doing the exact same thing. There's a huge delay between what stuff happening, a policy in reaction being created for it, and them actually implementing it, and then actually starting to use it and look at it because the judge said this is how you actually read the law. And we were saying that about privacy. So we started. Every company took a data privacy officer who basically says no a lot of the time. Like I'm very from my field as a data scientist. I'm very say data scientist. I'm very good friends, aka love hate relationship with data privacy officers because I understand how important their work is, like none other. But I'm also usually how to say this. I'm usually also the messenger that gets shot. We as soon as I request data for a model. I start asking for all the gender data, all the ethnicity data, and if we have data on whether or not they're gay, I also want to know that. Data privacy officer is trying to lynch me at that point when I'm asking for all that because that's all very delicate privacy related data, and I go like, if I don't have that, I can't check if my algorithm is being a racist, discriminatory bastard.
But who's going to know anyway? I mean, if you're running some algorithm with all that stuff, you can always just hide that and not tell anybody, right? Who's going to know?
No, because you have to measure it because it's there. There the unbiased model simply does not exist in the same way that an unbiased human does not exist, no matter what anyone tells you. Thus, I have to assume that if I'm, I don't know, forecasting if you're going to buy beer or get Alzheimer, I want to know if you're gay to check if we're discriminating in the model, or whether or not it is of influence. Whether or not it is of consequence is a different thing. But I can't even talk about that, can't even research that if I don't have data to check if it matters in the first place. Like, I was forecasting crime many years ago in Rotterdam. One of the biggest predictors for crime per neighborhood is the level of non-Western immigrants. That does not mean there is a causal effect, but I have to measure it so I can then control for it by saying, okay, I'm also going to add poverty levels because there's a high correlation between immigrants and poverty levels in my city. That does not mean it's a causal mechanism, but both strongly correlate with crime. And I need to know the causal mechanisms behind it to tell the computer and the machine what's actually happening, because the computer can't see the difference between skin color or wallet being a forecaster of crime. The computer does not know those causal mechanisms, and that's why there is always a human needed in the loop.
So one of my favorite movies is
Minority Report.
Yeah, Minority Report. So like I've also got some experience with AI and machine learning, so I'm interested in predicting crime. Go as technical as you can. What kind of model are you using? Is it unsupervised? Is it reinforcement learning? Supervised learning? What kind of parameters? Go ahead, knock us out.
Like, I can't openly talk about all of this for the record.
Yes, that's
sorry.
right. That's going to be quite
You
trade
can read
secrets.
you can read my old thesis on the matter, though. It should still be floating around online. But the point here is, and this is a tough one. Stuff impacts people differently at the micro level, individually, and at the macro group level. And for both, we basically need data to understand the issues before we can say anything about them. Because the most horrifying situation you can have is when you don't have data on something. And that is usually because the organization doesn't want you to know, or they don't want to track it because they already know the outcome, and it's not nice. I can't say we don't have a gender gap. I can't say we don't discriminate unless you give me the data to prove your organization doesn't, I don't know, discriminate against women or against people of color in recruitment schemes.
Mm-hmm.
We also need data for that. And I happen to have studied grabbing data and complaining about discrimination.
Mm.
And this is why AI and data science as a whole is a huge boon to, what's the word? This is why AI and data science is a huge benefit to, my brain, English.
Discrimination.
To fight discrimination, to fight inequality, to fight social injustice. I can only tell you you're being a racist bastard if I have the data to prove it. Otherwise, you'll just say no.
So what would be
that's what organizations do. That's what people do.
When you say that the unbiased person doesn't exist, well, what would be the closest thing that we've seen to the undiscriminating person?
The goal is never to be objective. The only, because that's a goal you can never achieve, you can never reach. The only thing you can do is to admit your subjectivity as much and as explicitly as possible. And in doing so, not being right, but being slightly less wrong.
The only person that's pulled that off is Jesus Christ, because he didn't care if you were poor or rich. He was objective in who it was. And actually, in that ideal Christianity in the Gospels, that talks about not being favoritism. So if we emulate Christian principles, then we shouldn't be discriminating against anything, ultimately.
I agree with you, but I'll also add there's no booze in this, so I'm still way too sober to talk philosophy and religion. But I will quote my favorite writer, Slavoj Žižek, on this, saying there is no politics and there is no religion. There is only ideology.
Okay. What
and
does
I'm
that? Or
thinking
what does
how you
ideology mean?
your ideology, how you think the world should be, regardless of whether that's because of a guy with a beard with a book from there, or a guy with a beard and a book from, I don't know, Germany or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm referring to Karl Marx here, by the way, obviously.
Okay, so another thing that we'll talk about today is the reason pretty much we got in touch is that basically we have the same ideology when it comes to Ukraine. And
Mhm.
you were actually, I was showing you some of my emotions on Twitter when when people say things like the Ukrainian government has killed more people than the Russian government. I just went red, man, because I went livid, man, because let me shut the door a second. Like I've been to Ukraine like 6 months this year. I've seen refugees. I've seen poor women with their kids running, cold and getting clothes and needing food. And
Mhm.
then this sort of conservative American guy goes on and he can say things like that, and I responded incorrectly because. But anyway, thank you very much for.
Fake news is something you'll see everywhere, or just propaganda, as we used to call it for the vast majority of last century, because that's how we connected online over our mutual support of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also why I got into this whole data field in the first place. Way back in the day when I was an underage little idiot stuck on the internet, hanging around in forums where I shouldn't be, like the good old WikiLeaks days. A lot of that told me about the power of data and the power of truth, of speaking truth to power. Because back then, in 2017, 18, when Iraq and Afghanistan was going on, we suddenly had people online going against the mainstream media, saying, no, the mainstream media is lying to you about this conflict, about this war. It's not just in this and this area of Afghanistan. We have data showing there's also combat over here, and here's a nice video of Reuters journalists getting shot. That stuff for 18-year-old Marijn changed my view on the world. Also, because we just weren't hearing about it until then. It's one of the main motivations why I got into data, why I got into science, and why I'm so obsessed with using data for social good nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Because the same stuff is still happening today. We're still using data to speak truth to power, to show what's really happening over there. Only now, the bodies we see dropping are in HD.
Mm-hmm. I got quite angry today. I read something about the UK. Something like 500,000 people in the UK missed cancer appointments because of the lockdowns and things like that. And I'm like, well, NSS, because like even at the time you could tell that people were missing appointments, but then the government, UK government, was basically creating fear to maintain their narrative. So I still don't trust governments that well too much. And the Iraq thing as well. I'm angry about that. That was just a joke.
I'm not saying you shouldn't trust your government. I'm just saying you shouldn't automatically trust anyone, because humans, and by large organizations consisting of humans, are fallible. This doesn't mean everyone's evil and a reptilian, but you shouldn't just blindly gobble up what people say either. And that is, in a part, we complain about fake news and algorithms and social media making this harder because it's not a global village, but it's a cozy cottage. That's the theory. Everyone can live in their own echo chamber, but it's not as if we didn't live in those back in the newspaper and in the radio days. It just went a whole lot faster, and the speed and quantity of information has increased 1,000-fold. But I studied this stuff. I did a minor, good old days, in media and communication. So they gave me Frankfurt Schule stuff to study, which was the main scientists on propaganda back in the 50s and 60s. And most of the stuff that's happening today, when it's about fake news, propaganda being spread for whatever reason, usually not to convince, but merely to confuse or to just, man, that's from the old Nazi playbook, literally. Just call people a name until people start believing it. Since 2014, Russia has been spreading propaganda in the West about Ukraine being led by Nazis, which is obviously a lie. But if you just keep saying Ukraine is Nazis for 8 years in mainstream media, the association will stick. This is the rotten fish tactic that was invented by the National Socialists, perfected by the Soviets, and is being used to this day. And I'm looking at it, and because I studied it, I'm like, oh God, this shit is real. That's the weirdest thing. It's like just studying dinosaurs for years and then seeing a dinosaur walk by.
So, what was your involvement with WikiLeaks?
I can't tell you
Okay.
at this stage, but I was very much obsessed with it, and I was a lot younger than I am today. But this is being recorded.
So, at what point did you start getting angry about what was happening with the Russian invasions?
Big part of that was happening in 2014 because MH17 got shot down. That's almost 200 people of my country alone, Netherlands, that were taken down. Not saying it wasn't already bad before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had the Arab Spring. We forget that the Arab Spring was a great movement, realized thanks to modern social media. Everyone was using Facebook to organize that stuff. But in the Netherlands at large, awareness of the conflict in Ukraine only began with MH17. We often forget that the Maidan revolution of Ukraine was also kickstarted by Facebook in the Arab Spring era, and they were actually successful because they had a very much dictatorial, oligarchical, pro-Russian government, and they toppled it and installed a pro-Western government, one that seeks to join NATO, seeks to join the EU, that is on the whole improving women's rights, improving gay rights, doing all the good stuff. But we were just not aware of it until our own people got shot, which is understandable, but also a terrible thing. Mm-hmm. And that's also the time that I really started getting really involved in the Ukraine case, because we were using so much OSINT stuff even back then, old recordings, some of them very fake, by the way, about Russians saying, "Oh yeah, we shut it down using a bug," and whether or not it's fake or true. And then everything wasn't in HD yet. But the evidence used in The Hague, like a few months ago, to prove that it was a Russian bug that was driven into Ukraine that morning and drove back out like the next day or something, that was used to show down MH17. That evidence used in court, we saw that many years ago online. And then it's like, wow, the internet has a form of truth in between all the piss and the lies and everything, all of its own. Like the good old 4chan quote. It's oceans of piss, but there's nuggets of gold in between. You have to traverse the oceans of piss, and you have to be able to deal with that. Many of us are not able to deal with that for very fair reasons. But there's truth out there. The truth is out there. To quote, what old American series was that again? The X-Files. The X-Files. The truth is out there. And if you know or have experienced that feeling of, holy shit, that's a thing out there, that's addicting. They can't say no. But that's also a rabbit hole that a lot of other fringe political parties these days have gotten very stuck in. So I do also see the risks of it, but I prefer to have those risks of the internet rather than a world without the internet, because then we wouldn't even have the ability to communicate about these issues, to look at all these issues, and to do a podcast like we're doing today.
So this evidence that made it to court, why did it take so long for that evidence, and why was it accepted in court?
That has little to do with the evidence and everything with the court.
Right.
Because international Court of Justice stuff is not fast, nor should it be overly fast, by the way.
The ICG, it seems like it's a lot of mechanisms just to persecute a very small amount of people. Do you think it's that much? Could there not been a better system than just that?
Oh, no, not at all. But it sets a precedent. And that's the main purpose of these very high-profile cases. In the same way as with GDPR, when I was talking about it, it sets a precedent for the next few times. And I'm from a criminological perspective, I'm not all for heavier punishments and stuff. But if it happens and it's very much public and everyone's looking at it, then you have to deal with it very seriously and very properly, because it will set the norm for decades to come. And that's also why these crimes that we're seeing by Russia in Ukraine now must not go unpunished, because that will set the precedent for the rest of the century, saying, hey, land grabs and modern colonialism are A-okay, you can get away with it. No, they mustn't get away with it. And we will see new Nuremberg trials, the post-World War II trials to judge like the guards of Auschwitz and such, saying, oh yeah, I didn't know, I was just following orders. Just following orders does not hold up in a war crime court. We've known that since World War II. It does not hold up today either. And doing the opposite, arguing, yeah, but they were just following orders, they were just being powerless, that's saying you should stay neutral and do nothing. That is choosing the side of the oppressor. I think that was Desmond Tutu who said that. Neutrality in the face of violence is choosing the side of the oppressor. And that's what a lot of people are still doing, knowingly or unknowingly.
So when you've got likely tens of thousands of Russians committing war crimes, because for me, anyone who willingly pulls the trigger of even just an artillery piece towards a town, that's a war crime. How do you process so many people through the criminal court?
You don't, and thank God I'm not a legal person, because I don't know how they're going to solve all that. But I do know that a lot of the evidence, more than ever before, is already gathered and online, because it's stuck on Twitter, it's stuck on Reddit, it's stuck even on TikTok, though somebody might remove it from there. Plenty of it is on LinkedIn too. And that is a form of the internet knows, and the internet does not forget, nor does it forgive, that we haven't seen before. Like the whole WikiLeaks scandal was such a scandal is because it had to be leaked on Lady Gaga CDs, I should remind you, before anyone could actually see it. Now it's all online. And it's in real time. This morning I was talking to a dude currently in Bucha. Bless him. Saving lives. Sending me footage of a dude who shot in the back, and they're carrying him onto an ambulance to get him back to the doctor. And I still don't know if I can publish that, because it's gruesome, but fuck, he's out there and he's saving lives. And it has to be seen. Because that's why we know. And that's why we care. And that's why we can do something about it. And that's why I'm thankful for the internet and the connectivity we have today. Because it makes our world smaller, and it brings us closer together as humans. And we need that desperately.
A lot of people don't know how to help Ukraine. They see it's such a huge problem, but if people would like to help, then what I say is find one person in Ukraine, whether it's one refugee, or find contact with somebody, and put all your effort into helping that one person, even if it's just a one-off gift of, I don't know,
yeah,
€400 or something.
I agree.
That is more than enough to help, so.
There's different levels. There's just spreading awareness, which on its own helps, because Ukraine has been disappearing from the news, and the moment it's gone from the news, it's gone from people's minds. 2 is to petition your governments, because those governments sending aid, especially weapon, tanks, whatnot, is what's keeping Ukraine alive. The moment, because they don't have reserves, they get missiles, they shoot them. They have to keep going, because they have to keep fighting an invading force that has been trying to take over their land for 11 months. The moment Western support ends, Ukraine ends. So Western support mustn't end. So keep awareness alive, petition your governments, and donate. Donating can be to big organizations, like say, or very personal ones, United 24, Saint Javelin, or through the Idopomoga platform, as you say, finding people over there individually. Like there was this great Santa movement last year, which I participated in, where you could just where you could get a message from a kid saying, "Hi Santa," yada yada, and you could actually respond to that by sending them stuff. The Edopomoka platform to this day has tons of citizens individually reaching out. Hey, I'm trying to raise funds for the car, the heating, a battery, and you can reply to that individually. And sometimes you even get a picture and such, and that makes it all very close and personal. And we need that level of emotional engagement
Mhm.
as well. And just kudos to the IT people of Ukraine who built that Edopomoga platform in like a few months, and that has been keeping Ukraine alive too.
Yeah,
And now
it's really
they're going to sell apparently their government platforms to other European countries. That was in the news yesterday.
great. It's always great to
Meanwhile,
get personally involved.
meanwhile, we still struggle to get access rights running for Western government IT services.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine's a bit like a mini no, it's like Israel in terms of it's been forced to innovate to survive, and that kind of
Okay.
pressure. When you look at people from Israel, they're really high performing entrepreneurs in most areas of life because they're forced to go to the army at a young age, deal with really difficult training and tension, and it brings out these really high powered entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same is going to happen in Ukraine. I just want to also give a sense of the pressure that people in Ukraine. I think it's worse than growing up in Israel right now, even though that there is a lot of danger in Israel. But in Ukraine, it's really hot right now. It's like a year long, 6 days Israel war where you've got such this overwhelming odds against you. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people there, young people might like not younger, like younger than me, like they're 20, 22, 23. And basically those young guys that I sit and have coffee with, laugh, go to the gym with, wrestle with sometimes, although I'm getting a bit injured the last time I did that with somebody neck choke.
Take it
Basically,
easy.
they can be at any time. Somebody comes along from the army and says, "Look, this is your time now. You got to go. You got to go to the training, go to the front lines." I know one guy who was killed with a mortar, and another guy from our orphanage who grew up. He's been killed. Another guy I know he's fighting now, and then another guy who's a chaplain there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I just can't relate because when I go to Ukraine, I can leave because I'm a British citizen. But those guys, I
Can't.
don't know what psychological stress that's going to cause you. Because if you don't want to, if you're not kind of made to even to go into the army, then and you're forced to go there, that's that's horrible stress, right? But
I know some of those dudes through online, through gaming, and basically in the first week of the war, one of them told me, "I'm gonna be online a bit less. I'm gonna get some real life inspiration because he builds video games." And I'm like shooter video games and such. And he's gonna find some inspiration in real life. Like, oh God, you're Ukrainian, because I didn't even realize. I just called him Eastern European bastard. He called me Western European bastard. It's how we became friends in the first place online.
right,
Because he was joining the army. He was gonna defend his country, and it's the humor. I think it's a coping mechanism. Humor is a coping mechanism, not like no other, that keeps him going. Post war, because they're gonna win, and the war is gonna end, there will be a huge demand for psychological help, PTSD treatment, all kinds of stuff. Because everyone's currently in survival mode. It's just postponing all of that through humor
yeah. When we have
and
some,
such to they will all need to process and rebuild themselves for decades to come. But there
yeah,
is no alternative.
yeah,
And
we see children with
that dude was my motivation, I think, also to be so obsessive about this conflict, because I was like, I can't aim an AK-47 for shit. And dudes I know over there, he hasn't messaged me in 2-3 months. I don't know if he's alive
what.
still, but they're gonna go there to save people. The least I can do is try to support them my way, which is by spamming online and raising funds.
Yeah, you must be
To
getting
send
close to.
helpers,
You must be getting between 10,000 to 100,000 views on your posts per post.
depending on the post
Yeah,
and how negative it is. Positive posts just work better on LinkedIn.
positive. Yeah, yeah. We see children refugees that come and they basically some weird noise happens outside. This is probably is even in Austria or somewhere safe, and they're running under tables. Can't I can't relate to that fear from because in a child everything's more scary. That is scary. So bombs to a child are much more scary than bombs to us. Because we're more objective. Even though bombs are
Yeah.
still scary.
Oh yeah, no. And another friend of mine fought way back in the Gulf War, and every New Year's he goes nuts because there's fireworks
Mm.
everywhere in this country. That's that happens, and that's also something we in our peaceful Western world can't relate to enough. But I think it's a good thing we are aware of it because it's happening left and right, and it has still been happening for decades in most of the world. Because most of the world, statistically speaking, is not the Western world.
Mental trauma. I won't say mental illness. I don't like that word. Mental trauma is a physical thing because you actually have physical pathways in the brain that respond
Yeah, you can
um,
measure it.
neg- negatively to stimulus, and it can be all sorts of phobias like that. And it's impossible to relate to somebody with that because it is a physical deformity in the brain that can be repaired through therapy. And I'm a big proponent of therapies. And I think it's going to be a huge need because this trauma that you'll
Mhm.
and it's not just the it affects the families. These stressed out soldiers, they'll come back and it's hard to live with them because they have damage to not damage. They have mental pathways that cause bad reactions to
Yeah.
stimuluses.
We as a society, and I'm going to talk from the Western perspective again because, hey, I'm a sociologist. Here we go. We'll also need to adapt to this because we have made great progress over the last decades in accepting people with physical handicaps, if I may put it that way, though we could still improve that a lot as well. But now we're going to realize, oh, wait, there's also a ton of people with mental handicaps in one way or another that we need to collectively take care of. We haven't seen that in Europe since post World War II. America had a wave of that post Vietnam, but they're still mostly in denial about that to this day, and not in a good way.
Yeah, I
The
still I still have
the
to.
whole
It's like
the mental health movement today is still has it easy compared to all the thousands of people with PTSD that will flood the market in the next decades because Afghanistan and Iraq was just peanuts in comparison to that.
yeah, I still have. Well, I have mental trauma issues from the whole COVID thing, and the Ukraine thing added on top of that. So I'm going through therapy programs. I won't tell you what they're like, but
And
I
that's a
do
good
a lot
thing.
of things to relax. Yeah, because
With all due respect, because Nikos, it's a good thing you're going through those programs because mental health is important, same
yeah,
as
I
physical
see a
health
problem.
is
I see my
important.
brain react in ways I can't control. But thankfully there are people that are professionals in this, and I pay money for it. So
Well, there's a whole industry ready to support you for that. I might have sat in the school benches with them, so I might be very biased. But I already explained to you that there is no unbiased human around. But I think the focus we now have on hey, mental health is a thing that a majority of older generations and majority of men still love to be in denial about. But then again, we're men, so we're in denial about a lot of things.
yeah, I've suffered much more in my life through mental things than physical things. Physically, I feel great, but just
Mm-hmm.
the past 3 years have been tough for many people. But
Yeah.
I mean, I was never into all this bushcraft and survival stuff. But you start thinking strange in a way that people that don't understand, like, start thinking about nuclear war and how to survive without water. But then when you go through things where you don't have any water and your water's run out, and you're like, okay, I need to go to the river to start boiling water. It's a different way of thinking. It's people won't understand that
We are
that have
so
tap.
far up in our own hierarchy of needs that we sometimes struggle to even process having to deal with basic needs like food, shelter, sleep, water. But now, roughly 2,000 kilometers that side from me, there's people worrying about that, just that. And that way, a few thousand kilometers, there's even more people. And that way, I'm generally pointing at India, China now, that's 1/3 of all people, many of whom also worry about this.
Yeah,
It is not a bad thing to worry about this because it brings us closer together. The worst thing we can do is to shut ourselves off from other
it,
people.
the first step in defeating mental trauma is to talk about it. That's
Exactly.
because you feel ashamed to have certain conditions that a lot of people suffer in science with. So I
And
mean,
I'm saying this as a man, which is terrible, but if you start talking about your feeling, the other person will start talking about feelings too. And that's in the end what unites us and makes us common humans,
yeah,
share our humanity.
Ukrainians are very stoic people. They're very strong, very tough. But when you have like emails from professionals that are struggling to feed to get water for their families and telling you how tough it is, that would have said anything, even if they were going bankrupt. In a sense,
Mm.
nowadays you're just like, okay, people are on edge there.
Yeah.
And they were on edge even in Kiev before the second invasion started. Like I thought of people cracking up in Kiev, from the
Hmm.
reports I
You were
had
there.
2 days before the mass invasion. Don't know where to
On
go
the
next.
other hand, 2023 is going to be an interesting year. Like Putin is probably going to try one last invasion blow with everything he's got. They're going to deflect it. Then they're going to cut off the land bridge to Crimea. Then they're going to retake Crimea, and that's the point where Putin will have lost the war, because the moment he can bullshit all he wants about losing and gaining land, mainly losing land over the last half year. But if he loses land gained in 2014, Crimea, then it's game over. Thus, the whole conflict is now slowly starting to revolve more and more around Crimea and Sevastopol, where, the harbor is that harbors the Russian Black Sea Fleet, without which he wouldn't have a Black Sea Fleet anymore. So, really, this is a war, not just a war, but it's a war for more war, because he needs Crimea to have a Marine and a Black Sea Fleet to fight more wars.
But I think Crimea's already doomed economically. No one wants to live there. The property market's crashed again. People are Russians are fleeing from Crimea. They
Oh
should never
yeah,
have went there in the first place. I don't feel sorry for them if they've lost all the
that's
savings there.
but that's a long-term process. If they cut off the land bridge, because the other bridge is already wrecked more or less, then it's just a waiting game. But waiting
Yeah,
games can take a while, a long time.
yeah,
And the more we support Ukraine now, the less there will be a waiting game later.
yeah. I don't understand Germany's. Obviously, tanks are going to Ukraine. I don't understand why um, Schultz is looking bad in the eyes of history
Oh
because
yeah, the Ramstein base meeting today, where most of Europe wants to send tanks, but Germany is saying no. So far, so far. I want to have hope and faith in my Eastern brethren that they'll come around, because Poland, the UK, France, everyone's sending tanks. But since Germany built a lot of those tanks, they have like some sort of claim to say whether or not their Leopold tanks go, and that's the whole issue. They're just
Mhm.
playing the delay game, really. Germany has a choice to either be amongst the leaders of the free world or to be its laughing stock, and I hope they choose wisely.
Yeah, I think Germany is being quite cowardly. The Germans were quite happy to take cheap Russian oil when Russia invaded anyway. And after what Russia did to Georgia and Chechnya, they're happy to live off the cheap gas. I bought a few investments in Germany recently as well before the war. And I'm starting to think maybe do I want to just dump all these stocks and
You mention important points here. The whole reason Putin can invade, why he has the cash to do so, is because we gave it to him. We as Europeans bought his cheap oil, his cheap gas for literal decades. We funded and fueled this war. We have a moral obligation to put a stop to it too.
yeah.
We have never been neutral in this conflict.
Yeah, I went to Turkey for a holiday a year and a half ago, and
Mm-hmm.
to be honest with you, I got on quite well with the Russians there. I didn't really have a. We were just. I would laugh at quite a few of them. We were eating a lot of meat and stuff like that. There's a few Russian bodybuilders there, and I
Mm-hmm.
quite enjoyed that holiday. But now I just when Russians look at my profile, I'm just thinking you're just silent in the face of. Okay, it's difficult to stand up against your regime, but it's no excuse for just allowing your regime to grow up. And I think what a lot of Russians have done is just let this thing grow because it's convenient. It's like they've let this cancer grow up until it's too big to kill and kills the host.
Like, it's complex, of course. I have Russian friends over here and internationally. Like, one of the best couples I know is a Russian dude and a Ukrainian girl, and they're raising funds for Ukraine together now. Like, bless the guy and bless that couple. It's beautiful in a terrible way. A lot of them just reject and push away from the whole stuff Moscow is doing, which makes sense from an emotional perspective. But and then when we say Russia, we mainly mean Moscow, Kremlin, Putin, the leadership. That's the disconnect, of course. But it's not like Putin is personally bombing. It's not like Putin is personally manning all the artillery. It's not like he's personally flying the planes, personally controlling the boats, and personally looting wash machines and doing God knows what to women and children over there.
Yeah,
No, that is thousands and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians. So yes, you should primarily blame the people at the top, but the people at the top are supported or at least tolerated by the masses.
mm-hmm.
But here we see the pact that Putin basically had with his people for 2 decades, which is you don't bother with politics and I don't bother you. That pact has been broken now that he started to mobilize. It started to do basically a general mobilization, but mainly in the poor regions. And this is why I love the Ukrainian language, because they don't say Russians all the time. They say Muscovites, people from Moscow, because Russia is not a federation. No, Russia is a colonial empire, but we should call it the colonial empire of Moscow. Moscow is where all the power, all the people, all the economics, and all the wealth is. And the rest of Russia, the largest country on earth, if we look at the data, just has colonies in the west and in the east, bordering Finland, bordering North Korea. And it's mainly the ethnic minorities from those regions, the Tatars, the Chechenians, people from Dagestan, the Buryats, those are being sent to the front.
It's ethnic
Those
cleansing,
regions
isn't it?
are extracted for their resources, be it gas or people, to use and used to fuel more colonialism. Russia is a modern colonial state.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes you wonder how
if I
much.
frame it like that, it becomes a whole lot more black and white, because I'm pretty sure France and America and the UK and everyone disagrees. Yeah, colonialism bad. Then why have we been fueling and paying for the last old colonial power to still exist? Because Russia has existed. The colonial empire of Moscow has existed for 500 years. Why were we fueling them still literally a year ago?
Because Putin's an excellent chess player, but he's just way overplayed this one.
He was pretty good at the game until he decided to invade. Then it went all downhill for him. Because the dictator at the top always fuels yes man syndrome, and that's usually their downfall. Nobody dared to tell him it was a really bad idea. Because though the people who tell him give him the truth that it's a really bad idea to start a war,
Mm-hmm.
they all had unfortunate window accidents.
I mean, Russian citizens living abroad, like, it's pretty obvious where you stand, because I can imagine if the UK had sent loads of tanks over into France and a bunch of French people and children were raped by British people, and UK started bombing flats there and terrorizing the population, and all French refugees were flying to Germany. I can imagine that I would go down to the British embassy and be quite radical there.
Mm-hmm.
So why are the Russians not doing that wherever they're at?
Because they
don't care, right?
over here, no. In part, it's learned helplessness, but also because they're not used to it. Over here, like France is used to protesting. They invented it ever since the French Revolution, when they started doing choppy chop for the first time. So they have a history and a legacy of doing just that. The Russians don't, and this is why normativity is so important. This is why the Maidan revolution of Ukraine in 2013-14 is so important, because that's the first time they really did it. Okay, no, not true. They have a history of trying to gain independence, but the first modern example we have of mass protests, of petitioning the governments, of honest to God modern revolution, the Russians don't have that. Right from the Tsars to being ruled by Lenin, being ruled by Stalin, and then being ruled by Putin. Yes, one was called communism, another one was just called monarchy, and now we say it's democracy. But it has always been Moscow dealing with everything, and Moscow just ruling over all the other regions with little to no autonomy for those regions, hence the colonial empire. And hence, this is not an excuse, but hence an explanation for the sheer inability to act on the side of the Russian people. It is learned helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to change that is by empowering them to change that, not by saying, well, you're screwed, nothing to help that. And that's what the majority of the neutral world, strangely, is doing. Saying, oh no, I'm against war. They shouldn't be fighting, so we shouldn't send tanks. Because then you say, okay, Ukraine get screwed. And you also say Russian people get screwed, because then you continue to empower the dictator. So staying neutral in the face of violence is choosing the side of the oppressor. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us are still doing that. You think we'd learn from history. Because if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it.
A lot of Muscovites were complaining at the start, and then I guess a lot of them are just like only start complaining once they're threatened. They're quite happy to just take over Ukraine, whatever. They don't care about refugees and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't see myself doing business with Russians in my entire life, unless there's clear evidence by whatever Russian or Muscovite stood against a war. Like, for example, the YouTube channel Inside Russia, fantastic Russian gentleman, Konstantin, even exchanged an email with the guy, and he fled there with his family. But he's really opens up a good perspective on what's happening.
Let me use a closing statement for that, because we've seen a similar mechanism happen post-World War II with Germany, who, if I may call them that way, I'm sorry, friends, during World War II, Germany was kind of the bad guy. We now... Did we judge and jail every single German for that? No. But did we judge and jail everyone who actively participated in it? Again, the Nuremberg trials? Yes. But did, in 1946, all the Germans feel themselves as the bad guy? Did they go, oh yeah, it was terrible, we shouldn't have done that? No. The German people at large felt they were the victim. Because they just got, the average citizens over there got bombed to shit in the year before. And everything was wrecked. Everything was ruined. So but nowadays, if you look at Germany, it's full of World War II memorials. So something happened in between. And it was not a snap from one day or another. Everyone wakes up and, oh man, we did that. No, that process took decades, specifically 2 decades. And I can't for the life of me remember the name of the writer, but he was great, who researched this and saw that only after 2 decades, so in 65, did the common consensus and the norm in Germany become, yeah, we did some messed up shit over there. Why? Because 2 generations had to die before that norm changed. Because with all due respect, the oldest generations, whatever time frame you live in, usually the older you get, the less you change. People can change. It's just less likely. Thus, time heals all wounds, but 20 years time is still a long time. And Germany made that transformation from that nation into a modern Western nation, on West Germany at least. We're talking West Germany here, in at least 20 years. And that was under the constant guidance and supervision of the Allies, the European Union, all that. Russia, if it wants to enact a similar transformation from a sociological perspective, I get to talk about my old study, this is fun, it's probably going to take more than 20 years. Because they don't have... They are not invaded militarily with all the controllers just wiped away and a democratic government being installed, because they don't have a history of an actual separation of the state legally and politically, like in the West we have ever since the French Revolution, with a separate court, justice, law, separate from the president. No, the president just writes the laws and does as he pleases, which Germany had, which was really handy to build upon. They also lack that factor. Thus, my prediction, it will take decades and probably some mortality rates before the Russian people or their descendants go like, yeah, that was some bad shit.
Yeah, one can hope.
This will change, I guarantee. But I am very afraid it will take a very long time.
Well, with that, Marijn, thanks very much for your time. Definitely, hopefully see each other in person one day. If not, we'll do a podcast again.
We'll have a beer for sure. I'm sorry for derailing the whole conversation into starting with data and then diving into ethics.
No, this was great. I really enjoyed this. It was really good. Well, thanks for your time, and see you on LinkedIn.
Thank you. Until next time.
Adios.
Bye.